I'm a landscape contractor. Been in the business for over 15 years, and let me tell you, grass has never made me want to commit a felony until I met HOA Karen. Let's back up. I got hired to manage a 100-plus unit condo development in upstate New York. Seemed like a decent gig. Pay was fine, contract was solid, and the board was mostly hands-off. The kind of place where the retirees wave at you with coffee in hand and go back to judging each other's lawn chairs in peace. Until it happened. The birth of the Landscape Committee. That's when the power vacuum sucked in three of the most insufferable retirees I've ever met. Karen number 1, Alpha Karen. Karen number 2, passive-aggressive Karen. And Karen number 3, email Karen. They were like a Voltron of micromanagement, and someone on the HOA board gave them authority. Actual, documented authority. Over me. And every blade of grass in that complex. Suddenly, I wasn't just mowing lawns. I was answering dozens of emails a day asking things like, why was this bush trimmed at a 30-degree angle instead of 45? Did your crew remember to apologize to the squirrels? Why hasn't the daffodil section been rearranged to reflect seasonal rotation aesthetics? No, I'm not exaggerating. These women had nothing but time, clipboards, and a pathological need to make every detail about them. After my garden proposal was shot down with all the grace of a wrecking ball through a greenhouse, I fired off a professional but firm email requesting records, meeting minutes, voting results, and documentation for the 8 other nearly identical gardens in the community. I wanted facts, precedent, something real to counter the HOA nonsense. Instead, Karen forwarded my entire email thread, complete with attachments, to her husband, a man with no standing on the board, not a member, not even a volunteer, just some nosy neighborhood retiree who now had access to my personal info and submission. And I found out because she did it by accident. Yup, she CC'd me. I stared at the screen, jaw slack. This wasn't just bad judgment. It was a clear violation of confidentiality. An HOA board member mishandling a homeowner's data? That's some real see you in court energy. So I started digging. Turns out our so-called voluntary HOA had been operating in full violation of Virginia's POA laws. The Architectural Committee was holding closed-door meetings. No public notices. No open votes. No accessible records. Every decision was made behind the curtain, Wizard of Oz style, with Karen pulling every lever. And according to the Virginia Office of Common Interest Communities Ombudsman, that's illegal. The HOA, even if voluntary, was still managing common spaces, entrance signs, shared greens, walking paths. That made them subject to state law. And the way they were operating? Let's just say the words class action were starting to sound real appealing. I sent one final, scorched earth email. I laid out every violation, every instance of secrecy. I explained how my application was legally approved by default. Over 30 days had passed without proper due process. I warned them. Any further mention of my garden would be documented as harassment, and I dared them to respond. Then I sat back and waited. And like dominoes, the requests started trickling in. One by one, the Architectural Committee members asked for access to the Google Doc they weren't supposed to have, including Karen. And finally, last of all, the HOA president himself. The message was clear. They knew they messed up, and I was just getting started. Now that I had the HOA's skeletons exposed to daylight, it was time for a little landscaping justice. See, I wasn't just some guy with a weed whacker and a bad attitude. I was a licensed contractor with access to suppliers, crews, and some of the most aggressive creeping vines you've ever seen. And if Karen thought my garden was offensive, she hadn't seen anything yet. I told my crew we were going to go rogue. Not illegally. I'm no amateur, but within every legal inch of code. I filed a landscaping enhancement permit for my own yard. Instead of backing down, I leaned in. Native grasses? We planted a wall of them. Wildflowers? We went full butterfly sanctuary. My yard became a textbook case in sustainable, wildlife-friendly landscaping. But across the street? That's where things got fun. Karen's yard, once trimmed within an inch of its life, started to look out of place. Sterile. Boring. Every day, neighbors passed by my riot of color and bees and life, and her beige wasteland. People started asking questions, complimenting my work. Some even asked if I could help redesign their yards. Soon, 7 houses had miniature versions of my setup. The HOA's iron grip on curb appeal crumbled. Karen had a full meltdown in an open meeting when someone dared to suggest her lawn was outdated. And me? I just smiled, watered my phlox, waved to the kids playing in the pollinator garden we'd installed near the sidewalk. HOA Karen had declared war on my landscaping. I retaliated by beautifying the entire block. She couldn't find what was already approved. She couldn't stop the change. And she sure as hell couldn't silence the growing crowd of homeowners who finally saw what was possible beyond beige fences and bark mulch. The best part? I hadn't even used the real ammunition yet. But I was getting close. You'd think after her meltdown, Karen might have backed off. Maybe taken a sabbatical from HOA drama. But nope. Instead, she doubled down. One morning I got a letter taped to my door. Handwritten. On floral stationery. It wasn't official HOA business. Just Karen, now trying to enforce her own Karen code. She claimed the sound of bees from my garden posed an audio hazard. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. I responded with a laminated sign in my yard that read, "Caution, bees at work, pollinating justice." But she wasn't done. A week later, she filed a complaint about visual congestion caused by my sunflowers. So I filed a counter request with the city to have her hedges evaluated for illegal height. Guess who had to trim 2 feet off her perfectly sculpted boxwoods? Word spread. People were enjoying the spectacle. I wasn't just maintaining landscapes anymore. I was running a full-blown suburban resistance movement. And the final blow came not from me, but from Karen herself. In a fit of frustration, she sent an email blast accusing me of bribing neighbors with free petunias in exchange for HOA defiance. Turns out, accusing someone of bribery without evidence? That's called defamation. My lawyer sent a lovely cease and desist. 3 days later, Karen quietly listed her house. The sign said "for sale by owner," but everyone on the block knew what it really meant. Karen had been evicted by Wildflowers, and I was just getting started. It's been a year since Karen left. Her house, bought by a lovely retired couple who asked for native plant recommendations before they even unpacked. The yard now looks like a curated page from a gardening magazine. The HOA? Still there, technically, but neutered. The new board is chill. Meetings are public, and people show up with cookies instead of complaints. As for me, I've got a wait list of neighbors wanting me to do to their yards what I did to mine. I call it neighborhood beautification. They call it therapy. Either way, I keep busy. Sometimes I walk by Karen's old place with my coffee in hand, bees buzzing beside me, sunflowers stretching toward the sky. And I think, not bad for a guy who just wanted to plant a garden. Turns out, the best way to fight HOA tyranny is with flowers.